I will kindly ask Axel Kalinowski from the London Stock Exchange to be the first speaker of the day. Again, I'd like to thank him for the partnership we have developed over these 12 years. And Axel, the floor is yours.
Again, a warm welcome on behalf of the London Stock Exchange. It's great to see so many of you early in the morning already here. I have a short presentation, not too many numbers, not to worry. But as Nicola sort of mentioned, we've been partnering with Capital Link now for the 12th year. In fact, some of you might remember the first few years we used to host this very event at the London Stock Exchange, but it's sort of in size and popularity it's grown so much that it's outgrown our own capacity, which is why it sort of had to move out of the London Stock Exchange. But that's credit to the team at Capital Link, particularly Nicolas, Olga, and the wider team sort of putting together this fantastic event. But just to show that as London Stock Exchange, we are very strong believers and followers and have obviously many clients and interact with investors which are heavily invested in this space. Over the next few minutes, I wanted to sort of give you a short overview. First of all, who the London Stock Exchange is. Many of you will already know, but also give you an update in terms of what's happening from a capital markets perspective, both on a global basis as well as sort of more specifically in London. As you know, London Stock Exchange traces its very history. So as an institution with over 200 years history, it traces its own history back to the shipping sort of community, when back in the sort of back streets of around the coffee houses in the city of London, people sort of came together to de-risk those shipping expeditions and trade missions, and sort of share the profit and risk involved in sort of launching the ships far afield. So this is how the first exchange was evolved, starting from the shipping sector. Today, the exchange is obviously a very interesting institution, I would say. It's not just a building in London. Today it's a global institution. In fact, we are just right now in merger conversations with a big tech firm and a data sort of provider. But essentially it touches on various fields, real-time information, post-trade infrastructure, as well the exchange business itself that many of you will be familiar with, where all the buying and selling of shares takes place. As London Stock Exchange, we also operate the Italian Stock Exchange, so Borsa Italiana is part of the London Stock Exchange group. But just to say, we have got over 6,000 employees, and most of them are outside of London and across many places in Europe, so very, very European, but also very global institution. Around a quarter of the revenues of the London Stock Exchange are generated in the US, for instance. And the London Stock Exchange is listed on the London Stock Exchange. So it's globally held by institutional investors. When I joined the exchange, the share price was at £6.80. Today it's £65, so it's been doing fairly well in a relatively short period of time. So just to show that it's a very dynamic institution. Let's have a look in terms of what's happening from just to touch on London. Why London? Why are we all sitting here? Obviously, London is a global financial center. You would think that when we open the news and read about the news and listen about the news that things have come to a standstill. It couldn't be further from the truth. I think London has been around for a long time and will be around for a long time. Also at London Stock Exchange, we've seen a fair amount of activity, but London itself is a global powerhouse of finance. So, for instance, it's the #1 foreign exchange center in the world. More US dollars are cleared in London than are cleared in the US. About 1/3 of global assets are managed out of London. So there's a huge pool of capital that sits here from across the world. And there are many, many other things. I don't want to go into too many details, but what makes London very, very unique on a global basis. And we as the London Stock Exchange sit at the very heart of it and are very well linked with everyone. From a capital markets perspective, I think it's quite interesting to point out that contrary maybe to sort of common belief, the market has been open and it's been very, very active. So you can, and it's actually somewhat performing differently to other markets. So here on this chart, you can see that on the left, this is looking at IPO volumes this year, 2019, compared to 2018. So you can see that London is actually up 33% compared to 2018, which makes it very unique. The rest of Europe is down 56%. so that's quite interesting. And also on a global basis, volumes are down actually 21%. So London has been outperforming the rest. When we look at the top 10 deals in Europe, 6 out of the top 10 actually took place in London, touching various geographies, various sectors, etc. But I thought that's quite interesting statistics because it's not something you might think when you sort of open the newspapers. One of the reasons for it is that like I mentioned before, a lot of capital sits in London, but London has very dedicated pool of capital. So there are around $300 billion that sit in London that are accessible to companies that are listed in London exclusively. So if you list somewhere else, then you don't really qualify because those are UK mandated funds that you would access. And that's obviously amount of pool of capital that exceeds most other places. Just to showcase a couple of sort of landmark listings that you might have come across as well. We welcomed early this year Network International, which is a Middle Eastern company, a financial payments services business. Last year we had Aston Martin just in front of the London Stock Exchange, so you can see there a picture with the flag that's right in front of the London Stock Exchange. So that was a great occasion. We had Red Bull Formula One cars standing in front of the exchange building, etc. And then we also had a fintech company, just to showcase 3 companies that have been sort of coming to London to raise capital. From a shipping sort of sector and maritime sector perspective, but more specifically on shipping, here just a little sort of overview of what's been happening in terms of fundraising activity. You can see that on average, about $9.5 billion are raised every year. So you know it's something to point out that actually companies are active on capital markets raising money. Most of the money that is raised is actually by follow-on issues, so those are secondary issues, where a company is already public and is coming back to the market for a second or third time. So this is the dark blue bit, and then in the light blue bit you can see sort of the genuine IPO sort of issuance, which is basically companies coming to the market for the very first time. And there is a fluctuation there, but you can see sort of further issues are very, very stable pretty much across every single year. Certain years a little bit higher than normal. But even post-financial crisis, even the years 2008, 2009, where you would think that the world has fallen over, actually there were record amounts of sort of capital issuance. And this is, I think, one of the sort of specific things that I would point out to you in terms of when you think about how to fund a business that is sort of operating in this space. Capital markets are just a puzzle of the piece, but they can be a very important puzzle because, as the chart shows, even in a crisis period, investors tend to support the companies they already have in the portfolio. Whereas, for instance, if you're reliant purely on a lender, there can be issues in terms of accessing further sort of funding from those in sort of difficult times. So it's sensible to have a diversified source of capital and funding, just to de-risk and be able to manage and cushion certain developments which are sometimes out of our hands. So it's an important piece of the puzzle, and a lot is possible. Basically, we've seen a lot of different structures, and I'll touch on it. Just in terms of global ECM activity in the sort of global maritime shipping and transportation space, over the last 24 months, we've seen 2 deals in London, and interestingly, 7 out of the top 10 sort of global equity deals were in Europe. Only none in the US. So none of the top 10 global ECM sort of IPOs took place in the US. 7 out of 10 in Europe, 2 out of those in London. So that's quite an interesting sort of development. On the further issue side, a lot of activity in Asia in particular, a lot of Asian companies sort of coming back to the market for a second or third time, so there's been a lot of activity in that space. By the way, this presentation is available sort of post-conference. I think it will be circulated or is downloadable on the website, so otherwise you can sort of study that afterwards. London itself, of course, I don't need to tell you, has an ecosystem in this space, touching on companies with a long-standing history, and we are proud to be part of the ecosystem, with many of those listed on the London Stock Exchange. In fact, we have 27 companies that are listed in the space currently on the London Stock Exchange, with various degrees of success. So some have been doing extremely well, others have been performing on a stable basis, But yeah, a lot of sort of activity in this space. To single one out, for instance, Clarkson's is quite an interesting sort of company that has raised sort of capital for 3 times over the last 5 years for various reasons. The first capital raise was in connection with an acquisition of RS Plateau, a sort of Nordic business, advisory business that they acquired. So they came to capital markets to raise money for that. And then they came a second and third time to raise money. In total, they raised $144 million over the last 3 years. So they've been using capital markets for the right purpose. And then a sort of interesting business is also Tufton Oceanic. I think we'll have someone from Tufton Oceanic sort of speaking later on today as well here. But from our point of view, it's an interesting business. It's basically a fund that has raised capital to acquire, to provide steady yields to investors, but predominantly acquire second-hand sort of vessels in the market and then sort of operate them. And yeah, they basically raised $91 million at IPO, and then just a few months ago in March, they raised another $50 million to, for instance, acquire a container ship. So yeah, interesting business because the fund is also trading at the premium to net asset value. So there's sometimes this perception that companies don't trade at net asset value or below a net asset value. This is actually a fund that is trading slightly, but still above net asset value, as you can see by the blue line on the chart there. So yeah, this is just a very short snapshot to highlight just very briefly what is happening from a capital markets perspective. Will be a pleasure to sort of touch base with you as during the day. I'll be around, and if not, sort of please consider us. The doors at the London Stock Exchange, we're not too far from here, always open. So very happy to sort of shake hands with you and sort of discuss what's happening in the space and see in what ways we may be able to work together. So thank you very much and enjoy the conference.